Thank you. Sorry. Look at me talking. It jumped over and started. The thing doesn't unmute when I go straight to the other screen. It's supposed to. Thank you. All right. I'm here. I'm now. I'll wait till the chat catches up. It's so sad when it happens. So sad. There we go. Starting over. Where were we? Okay. What I was saying was when the automatic transition thing kicked in and it's supposed to unmute my microphone and it didn't. Thanks, Ecamm. Thanks for nothing. Welcome to Humpdays with HAL. I think one of the things that we can all agree on is that a lot of the anxiety, I think, and exhaustion that people feel in modern life is attributable to almost singularly the fact that news that used to be available to you only on a statistical level, you know, news from across the sea, news from other countries, wars and rumors of wars, came to you in kind of minor detail. You know, you got it like a bird's eye view of the whole thing. This happened today. This regime is fighting these people. We know that that's occurring. But now, and increasingly since I would say the mid-90s, the personal nature of the news has been thrust into your eye holes and ear holes. And so, let's see. Sorry, the chat's coming through, and hi. Welcome. Sorry about the misfire in the morning. It happens. It's the morning show. So, you know, we go easy on that. Now, I think that's directly related to why people are just kind of overwhelmed and anxious. Super chat. Subpoenas are not optional, damn it. It says Angela. Thank you for the super chat. Angela. Move this down here so people can see when people chat things out. Good morning to everybody. Midas Sue, that's very sweet. We're lucky to have you. Thank you for being with us. Hello, good morning. Yeah. Fatigue, too much info comes in. That's Kevin, that is my argument, is that it's not even just the volume of information. Because quite frankly, if you wanted to, for a good long while, you could get this information if you sought it out. But it was still in a format that was much closer to just information for information's sake. Whereas now, the essence of sort of clickbait media and the need to get, you know, sort of an emotional connection to things to get people to click on them. Emotional manipulation has become so much a part of the marketing necessary to media as we move away from newspapers to something that's spread out over, you know, literally thousands of sources. Not only can you get the big newspapers and the big media outlets, but you can get individually, you know, the Twitter feeds and Facebook feeds of the hosts on those shows. And I mean, I would include Mattoblog in this as one of the things where there is so much coming out of a single source that's far more personal than it used to be just in the big media organizations. And then you stack that on top of, you can read and have stories from a foreign country automatically translated via the web and read their stories as told by the locals there, so that the feelings that you have when you read the story are much more acute. And in some ways, it has made us more sympathetic, I think, in a good way, to the plight of others the world over. On another instance, though, it has, I think, brought a level of emotional responsibility, or the assumption of emotional responsibility for people that they don't necessarily have the capacity for. That, you know, I've started branding my view of the world as optimistic stoicism. And a lot of it is based on the idea that I'm aware that there are things that don't get better because I feel more about them, but might get better because I think more about them. And because there's no distinction in media between those two things in terms of getting you to click on a story in most of the things, and that doesn't include, I would think, I mean, it certainly shows up in things like Market Watch and Bloomberg and what would be sort of the financial markets where you would think it'd be the most insectile in how they handle stories. There's still a lot of emotional content in there as well to keep people reading once they're there, because the advertising is a big part of that. Not stoic optimism. No, I would call it optimistic stoicism. I would put the optimism first as a primary category and a direction of the stoic feeling, as opposed to curtailing my optimism with stoicism, if that makes sense, Scotty. That is an important distinction, and it's important to talk about this. But I would say that, like, there are, if you look at medical journals or business dailies or those kind of things, they'll have a kind of, information-based content that is devoid of a lot of the emotional response. It's just how it is. That is valuable when it comes to news, and was normal even with what, like, stories of war and peace and hunger and famine and social growth and all and social issues the world over, in terms of rebellions or prices and wages and labor movements, and those kind of stories had a much more sort of fact-based attachment in your life than an emotional one. And I have to say, I think that's healthier. I think it's healthier to look at stories outside of your locus of control directly, either through the extremity, the extreme edges of what you can do, which is like run for office or vote yourself, and then have a direct impact or file a lawsuit in your own legal system, those kind of things, or contribute to an organization that does something within these fields that you're thinking about, versus having an emotional attachment to something that you cannot change, you cannot affect, not in any immediate sense. And emotions are immediate. Most of your emotions only last about 17 seconds. Amy Lynn, have you noticed news repeatedly saying shooter's name and focusing on him instead of the victims? Yes, that's a factor of news rollout. It's an excellent point. Part of that is timing. Part of that is that we know and the shooter's identity, or the alleged shooter's identity, much quicker, and the why of it, or if he acted alone, if there is a chance that he was connected to other people, is useful information for the general public, especially when he was at large for a time. Whereas the names of the victims, especially in situations like this, are up to the family, wanting that information out, and what kind of timing, because they want to call their family members and the like. So there's a speed aspect to the availability of news, and since when there's an extraordinary event like this, people want the information. They want to know what happened. They want as much detail as they can get. So the first detail that will often come out is the identity of the person who did it. That will be followed by the notifications of kin and the information about people who were harmed, and whether or not those families want their family member's name put out. If that makes sense. So a lot of this is mechanical factor. And I think, by the way, people have an emotional response to that as well. I think they go, why aren't they focusing on that? Why aren't they saying these things? And you have a distinct feeling about this some of the time, because it seems as though they are focusing more on someone like that than they are on the names of the victims and the like, when in reality it is simply a material factor. It is just information coming out as it comes out in a shocking story where everybody wants as much info as they possibly can get, especially when for a time in a highly populated area like Highland Park, Wilmette, Winnetka, Lake Forest, the surrounding areas, Bannockburn, Northridge, the areas around there where this dude might have been running around, God knows doing what, or planning what next. And then Chicago itself as a big city nearby, and this guy might be on the lam, those kind of things. Those stories, that's as that story unfolded while they were trying to figure out who did it. And the story that he dressed as a woman to get through, to run with the crowd, to escape, is, some of the story that's coming out. That will fascinate people, and keep the story of who he is and what he was thinking and what it was about and how many red flags were missed, which I think is key to the story of most of these guys. I think that's the shift that you see in most of the shooter stories that we have, is people genuinely recognizing that there were telltale signs and could more have been done. Let's see. So these are crucial aspects of the story that are germane to people, especially in the local area, which are more important than the national audience that is not in the local area. So both the missed red flags aspects, because that will have to do with zoning and rules in both the city and state and the surrounding area, the county. When people start moving to what can we do? Because most of your emotions, and I always get pushback on this, but it's true. Emotions last about 17 seconds unless you re-up them. That's why people seek sort of the endorphin rush of when they're in an angry or a sad state, to keep pushing that emotion and reinforcing it. And in these particular stories, and in these particular huge events, people seek their own version of the emotional response that they want. So let's see. Yes, not mourning the last few years. Mourning is a state I wouldn't consider an emotion. And I would also say, Vincent, that mourning as an emotional experience is a state of being, not an acute emotion. Because even while you're mourning, you can laugh, you can cry, you can be angry, you can go through many stages during the mourning process, and yet you are still mourning. I know that's been my experience. I know a lot of people have, who've been through trauma know this as well. Show pics of kids with their heads decapitated by a gun, and the emotions will last longer. That's an arguably. I'm by the way, Vincent, I'm sorry for your loss. And Glenn, that's debatable. Showing that to some people will simply shut them down. Right. The gun shop owner in Texas was even quoted as saying the Uvalde shooter made the hair on his neck stand up, but he had no legal reason to deny the sale. Background checks work. Exactly. This is why you can, there are measures that can be taken. There you go. And the MAGA folks in downstate Illinois are participating in an invasion from the cities at any moment. Are anticipating an invasion from the cities at any moment. Oh, I see. Like they think people are going to leave the greater area and move out to the sticks. Yeah. I don't see that happening. Certainly not from the Highland Park area. You have to have compassion to begin with. I mean, I think that's a crucial part of human existence. I also think, though, that some people learn compassion through the experiences they have in their life. They may not have been aware of the hurt other people feel. And it sometimes takes an experience by them, and something happening to them or close to them or them. A lot of times, people who don't have a really high compassion reflex in these situations either had it weaponized when they were young. Their own compassion or empathy was used against them by being made to think it's a weak characteristic or something like that when they were young, and so they avoid it. And those people tend to not relearn their compassion or find their compassion through even their own personal experience, because they'll still be seeing it through their own beliefs about that, and it will put a check on that. So they'll be confused by their own mourning, their own hurt, and maybe push back against it in a way that they might not with someone that they are sympathetic towards. So in the case of someone like that, a lot of times if it happens to someone they care about, that's when they'll learn. That's when they'll find their compassion. Unfortunately, there are many people who lack compassion or empathy. Liberal Dan, I'm not sure that's true. I think most people are compassionate and empathetic. Even the ones that try to hide it and stuff it away, for fear it will be weaponized to make them change their mind about something where their fear is stronger than their compassion reflex. They are more afraid of this marauding attack they have envisioned from some other source, this other, than they are of losing their compassion or empathetic reflex, or they're worried that someone will use their capacity for compassion and empathy to allow the monster in the door. I mean, it's a great example. If anybody saw Bird Box, the John Malkovich character in that, I mean, the Bird Box itself is a pro-Trump piece of propaganda. Like the idea that it was somehow seen as like liberal or progressive or something is just idiotic. Like it literally ends with the only way that you can save yourself is to be blind to the world, and they end up hiding in a place that is surrounded by a wall that keeps the bad people out. Like it's, come on. Anyways, but his character is, once they're all in this house, says, I don't want to let anybody in. We're not letting anybody comes to the door, we're not letting them in. He doesn't do that because he doesn't care about people, because he doesn't trust them. That's different than lacking compassion or empathy. His fear has overridden his compassion or empathy. The fascinating part about that story, and like I said, the mythology around it being something left-leaning is sort of stupid, but he turns out to be right. The two people they let in, of the three, or rather, that they let in, two of them steal the only car and leave. They end up dying. And the other one is affected by the creature and ends up killing the pregnant woman in the house. That's the story. So that's based on his practical fear. Now, it also is what gets him killed later. So there's a return on investment to that kind of thinking. Right. It's about balance, Kevin. That's exactly right. So there you go. Spoiler alert. The movie's been out for a while. I'm not ruining anything for anybody. By the way, fear kept many German, Austrian, Hungarian, Polish Jews alive, smart to leave Europe 90 to 100 years ago. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Diane. She just tested positive for COVID. You'll be fine. You'll be healthy. I wish good health upon you. I'm pretty sure you're vaccinated, so you should be all right. I can't help but feel like anyone who would hurt or kill others have no empathy. I agree. Some of them, the ones that ultimately do, this is where you'll find people who end up doing themselves in after a mass shooting or something. It's because they didn't think they had it, or they thought it would be like a video game, or they thought it would be an antiseptic experience. And when you watch someone perish or suffer, it's heartbreaking, even if you thought you didn't have a heart. And so some of those people in those moments, there's some of them are bullish and are like, I don't want to be taken alive, and they think it's something macho. But a lot of them also are collapsed by the reality of what they did. They thought it was going to be something it wasn't. By the way, this is Nancy. One of our people in the chat just said they tested positive, so we're just wishing them good health. Maybe empathy is misdirected, like they are doing you a favor. Sometimes there's a feeling of that. I feel like we're sliding into theocratic fascism. Can I get some hopium? We're not. We genuinely aren't. As a matter of fact, if we were, they wouldn't have to use the SCOTUS to overrun these rules like this. If we were really falling into theocratic fascism, there would be more people going along with it ultimately. And again, the SCOTUS as we know it that took down Roe v. Wade was not created by the activity of a group of people so much as the inactivity of our side. I blame us for not showing up consistently at the polls and doing this half-assed, what have you done for me lately stuff a year and a half into every presidential term, where they're like, you better show me something by November or I'm going to sit out. That basically is just a signal to the Republicans that you don't care enough to fight, so they don't have to worry about you. Yes, it is, Kevin. It is. I have been there. And it is, I was about to say indescribable, but that's not true. It's been described by artists and authors and human beings since time immemorial. And what you can describe is your attachment to that person, watching it, wither, fade, break, whatever, while you desperately try to cling to it. And it's something you can have with a stranger as well. It doesn't matter. How are we not screwed? Oh, we've been through worse, Kevin. I have to tell you that, again, even with the current Roe v. Wade circumstance, the vast majority of highly populated states where most people live, and specifically most of the women in this country live, will have abortion services still available to them. The red states that try to diminish this right or available treatment will, for a time, pretend that they have succeeded because the women that need that procedure will go to another state. And they will be, for a time, able to lie to themselves and say they've solved it until their young women specifically start being harmed by this, because they can't leave the state or they can't find these things, and they'll answer for that. Well, we'll do everything we can in the highly populated states to help women who need the service or to save their own life or their ability to have children in the future or any of those things. And also, by the way, by doing everything that for someone who's having a kid, because I think that's the biggest anti-abortion thing you can do is make sure that women get prenatal and postnatal care, especially if they're poor and can't afford it, that you have safe environments. I mean, there are women in this country that are choosing not to have a kid because they don't feel like it's safe to bring a child into the world as it is right now because of all the guns on the street. And the right will never cop to the fact that they participate in the reasoning behind someone choosing not to have a child. While Democrats and people who are making those changes will ultimately facilitate more life because women won't feel afraid to have a kid in this modern environment if you can pass laws to protect life after it's been born, which is the thing that Republicans always seem to pass on. Actual life, the living part of it, the growing and deciding and being and choosing. Some children will always be born into misfortune. Agreed, Vincent. Agreed. And it, that you can't eliminate that, but you can create an environment where that misfortune has as little impact on their life as possible. There are people who are born into fortune who end up a mess. So, there are no guarantees in that part of it. But there, like in the industry that I'm in, as far as like the thing I learned about like acting and comedy and stuff on a business sense years ago, more than any other thing, was that I couldn't create a yes in somebody's mind if I'm pitching a show or trying to get hired for a part. I can't create a yes for them because I don't know all the factors they might have in saying yes to me working there or bringing this project there. I could, however, eliminate the no's. I could solve for the things that would automatically disqualify me. And so I would get about doing that. And the same thing is true about, I think, a big portion of the pro-choice fight going forward is to start eliminating a lot of those no's and make a point of that the Democratic choice version of being pro-life is that we support the living, the life of that child, the needs and wants of that child as it's brought into the world, instead of once it's no longer a fetus, it's born with original sin and it's on its own. I disagree with most of this opinion, but not all. In the overall, Dems want better for the people. Are there some corrupt Dems? Of course, there are, but at this point in history, to try and equate the moral equivalence to those who actually do something about guns, it is put the Dems in control or suffer the loss of our democracy, period. Dems will right the course and save democracy, in my opinion. I agree, Shadow Woman. Yeah, I mean, we are in a vote blue no matter who system, but it's not acute. It's been true for years, and it will be true for years, because these kind of changes, when you're talking about people who all they want to do is tear down a system and destroy the safety net, for example, building the safety nets takes work, a lot of work. It takes time. It takes tweaking. Because even the good things you do will have unintended consequences. And so you're going to have to measure and speak honestly about those unintended consequences and tweak the system you're building to answer those things, because you want it to work. When you're up against people who don't want it to work, who believe that the solution in it is in the collapse, which I would say is currently all of the Republicans, elected Republicans, and a big, loud chunk of the far left progressives, who believe, like the Susan Sarandon idea, that the whole system needs to be burned down so you can show people how it was always kindling, which is I gotta say, a childish and dickish way of dealing with reality. And by the way, talk about lacking empathy. Anybody who would give up the benefits of the ACA and say, I'd rather have a vote that goes down that had Medicare for all in it, for example, that failed, than have the ACA that came through pass. Anybody who says that is saying the 24 million plus people who were helped by the ACA, they were a necessary sacrifice. They should have been sacrificed to solve for this thing. They should have been allowed to die or go broke or be bankrupt by their sickness or have their child kicked off their plan or those kind of things, because having those incremental steps may have lengthened the time to get to Medicare for all, and therefore those people have to die to be sacrificed to showing that the system is evil at its root, and therefore you just have to shrug off their deaths and their illness and their bankruptcies until we get everything. And I would say that is lacking empathy. I think that is not compassionate. I also think that the recognition of how long change takes to happen and the incremental progress that is made, that has been made throughout humanity, and as we make our country more inclusive and more powerful as a representative democracy, that the incremental changes we've made from the founding of the country, post-Civil War, the Civil Rights Movement, women voting, all these elements have been incremental, some of them decades apart. But they were that's how they had to play out. They weren't all going to happen at once. And the attempt to do it would have been a failure, and therefore all those wins would have been erased. And we would still be in sort of a fiefdom, basically monarchical system. The neuroplasticity of young humans allows you to optimize the human potential available in a population. Yeah, but that doesn't mean it will, David. You could also turn them into cult members. Much easier and much quicker. I mean, that's why I've been warning people about TikTok. It's interesting to me. I'll show you guys something, because normally this is a good time to start on our look at trends. But there's been this like libtards of TikTok or whatever it is thing that's been getting in the news lately, and I want to see where this thing is. Let me find this story. It was. Let's see. Let me find this one story. But the essence is that TikTok is that's fascinating too. I want to show you something here as well. Basically the idea is that TikTok is I'm gonna have to do a search on the site to find it. Is breeding the next generation of fascists. Here it is. Okay, so let me bring this up, and I'll switch this over so I can show you guys. Okay, shrink this down. So the story came out. I'm gonna try to do this. There we go. That's better. This is on Raw Story today. Crypto-fascist ideology on TikTok is building the next generation of fascists, according to this report. Okay, this is and it's interesting how they're talking about it on Raw Story, which is a very left-leaning website that's a news aggregate. I would consider it one of these sort of barrel edition pages like Huffington Post, where they just basically steal other stories from other sources, give you a summary, and then send you to the link. The Chinese-owned social media network video platform TikTok is being used by accounts propping up surging Christian nationalist and crypto-fascist ideology in the United States, according to a new report by Vice News. Christian nationalists believe that their country's policies and laws should reflect evangelical Christian values. Culture wars like LGBTQ rights, critical race theory, or immigration are regarded as signs of moral decay and imperil their nation's future, Tess Owens explained. Christo-fascists take that one step further and believe that they're fighting primordial battles between West and East, good and evil, right and left, Christians and infidels. On TikTok, ideologues from both ends of the spectrum, and this is kind of the crucial part of it, are weaving together a shared visual language using 4chan memes, scripture, Orthodox Catholic iconography, imagery of holy wars, and clips from movies or TV featuring toxic male characters. Many of the videos on their face are innocuous enough, but they exist in close proximity to disturbing, violent, and explicitly white nationalist content. The biggest TikTok account in the space is Kate Litzich R, which California, Lice each R, I don't know what it is, who claims to be based in Ireland and racked up 30,000 followers and over 2 million views since posting their first video in September. They removed the account after Vice News reached out for comment, but another account posting the same content was activated soon after. One popular Hashtag is Christ pill, which references the red pill meme to describe far-right radicalization. That's this site or whatever, this base orthodoxy concept. But that's the TikTok. Yeah, embrace Christ, Christianity, Christian. Okay, hashtag blah blah. That they're doing Pepe the Frog as the Pope. They're, this is hyper right wing stuff. They're trying to build this group of crypto fascists. And Philip Bittner's joining us. Hold on one second. Should be able to be in there in 1 second. Let me give me 1 second, and then I'll bring him in. But in this process, this is basically an identical story to the kind of stuff you saw about hyper left leaning, like the trans ideology, kind of spreading to children. Stories that you saw on the right wing about this on Breitbart. This is a flip flop of that exact story. So no surprise that we'll hear that. Okay, now let me bring in Philip Ittner in 1 second. Hold on. There he is, and we'll put him in here. Hold on 1 second. There's this guy, publish. There we go. And why do I hear music?
Hi.
Hi.
You hear music?
Oh, hold on. Yeah, I hear music. Okay, that was from the site that I was just doing. Okay, we're good. Hey, everybody, say
toast.
Yeah, no, it was. I don't know why, but it was started playing from Raw Story all of a sudden. It was like digital balalaika. So it was almost. That's why for a moment I was like, maybe it is playing. Maybe that's your ringtone or something. But hi, welcome. How you doing? Good to hear from you. Glad you're here. Beard's looking high and tight. It's solid. Everybody says hello.
Thank you. I've been on the chat, and I didn't want to interrupt you because a lot's been happening back in the States.
It's true.
So yeah,
appreciate it.
Not that it's been quiet here, but
no,
but boy,
yeah. And again, this is an ongoing problem that America's been going through for a long time. And the changes to solve it will not be overnight or immediate. And this is exactly why I'm talking about why you do long-form democracy instead of treating it like an app. You can't swipe right and suddenly have a functioning democracy. And there are more almost boomer age and Gen Xers that have that problem these days than some, people want to lay it at the feet of millennials and Zoomers. But quite frankly, those kids aged up since the last election, and a lot of them are getting very practical. So that isn't it's a rotating problem that you have with the young voter.
I think there is some generational differences. Boomers being boomers, and I share with you being a Gen Xer, so we're always described as the forgotten generation.
Right.
But look, I do think that there is something in generations that follow after us of the desire for immediacy and a lack of understanding that change does take time. If I want to dunk on our own generation a little bit, we were all so coolly cynical, and it was all, I'm not going to believe in anything, man. I don't believe in the greatest generation, but then I don't trust those boomers either. It's all BS, man. Have you watched what is the seminal work? Everybody says it's the picture of us as a generation with
Reality Bites.
Rider. What?
Reality Bites.
Reality Bites.
Yeah.
You watched that recently?
Not recently, but I remember at the time being.
We do not come off well.
No,
it does not age well.
Well, and also it's a pre 9/11 movie. It has a lot to do with the uptick in prosperity with the the downward slope of responsibility, mechanical responsibility. So there was an element of ease in the 90s where the big problems were overwhelming and made you nihilistic because you couldn't do anything about AIDS. You couldn't necessarily, you saw the LA riots, but if you didn't live there, you certainly weren't going to, you couldn't do anything to stop them even if you lived there. And outside, it looked like the decay of Western civilization from far away. But at the same time, that's why most of the songs are about like how much your dad didn't talk to you. Like these are the problems we thought we had at that window.
Yeah, but I mean, we also, the Gen Xers, we were able to look back at the two prior dominant generations, the counterculture having, intended to sweep away so much of the the things that were criticized in prior generations.
Right.
And we had the advantage of looking at the guys who brought in the counterculture and the hippies and all the revolution aspect of the 60s and 70s and said, you guys screwed it up too, and so
I
think
the
we
truth
were a little bit overly cynical, but
right.
And self-indulgently cynical, but that's the Gen Xers. I do think there is an immediacy problem with the digital, because keep in mind, we're the last generation that will know what it is like to live in a non-silicon, non-telecommunications world. We saw that transition. I remember being on a Commodore 64.
I remember having a friend who said he was never going to get a cell phone.
Things like that.
I remember very distinctly my buddy saying, I'm never going to get a cell phone, as if that was an option. And it seemed like alien to me. Like at the time I was like, you do realize this is just the beginning of this technology. This is just like, phones are the written word, honest to God. Like this is coming whether you like it or not. And there's a lot of things about that, and this will kind of lead us into our conversation about technology in both the war as it's going down. Oil, there's a story that came out today, which was, I think, surprised a lot of people, that Russia is selling oil at a discount, and so is Iran. Iran has had to, because they can only sell it to countries that will only buy sanctioned oil, and therefore the market for it has been kind of, audience of three, but it's been there. It's been pretty consistent. Now Russia's in the same sanctioned box as Iran, and they're fighting over customers. And so they're having to cut their prices to compete with Iran's prices, which is not enough to make up for the loss. The idea is that they're just going to sell money hand over fist to China. They're going to make a ton of money, and the Americans aren't going to sell any to China, or the Europeans or Qatar or any of these countries that are helping us aren't going to sell any, which is not the case at all. But the idea that Russia, was going to make this great deal, they're going to sell it at a premium as the price continued to climb to like $200 a barrel. It dropped below $100 yesterday for the first time in a while, and it by 8%. It went up half a percentage point yesterday. And it was like, it's back up. And they're like, no, it's not. And it's going to, because of demand destruction, the possibility of a recession, a bunch of other stuff, and this weird black market that's going on, they're watching the price continue to fall. And a lot of these regimes are propped by this.
They can't keep propping up the ruble.
Right.
They're in trouble. They're in serious trouble, and they're not going to be able to. I mean, aside from the economic crisis that is almost inevitable at this point in Russia, they're also not going to be able to resupply their military. So the war effort is going to be deeply damaged by that.
Right.
They can't, as we've discussed, you can't replenish any modern weaponry because you need chips for that, and they're not able to. They can't get access to the international trade in computer chips. So, I mean, look, it is not going well right now here. Mm-hmm. It is. I'm sorry to follow up bad domestic news with bad international news, but things are not going well out in the East, and there's no sense in sticking your head in the sand about it. The Ukrainians had hoped to do what they've been doing since the beginning of this war, and that is to fall back on a defensive line that they can then pin down the Russians and suck all the focus onto one primary target. I mean, that's what was done in Mariupol. That's what was done in Severodonetsk, and they had hoped to fall back on the high ground at Lysychansk, and they got outmaneuvered. They got outmaneuvered, and they got driven off of Lysychansk. And the defensive positions that they built up there by a series of Russian operations that dislodged them came at them from directions. They did a partly airborne assault, apparently. So they lost Lizzie Chance. There's no spinning that into a good for the Ukrainians. That's not good. And it does look like they are now centering on another town in Donetsk. They've pretty much got Lugansk. They're going to go for Sloviansk. They're going to go for Sloviansk.
Right.
So right now, the Ukrainians are doing everything they can to evacuate Sloviansk. It's not the smallest town in the world. It's I don't know. I know Sloviansk is a mid to Midland. On those. I don't know if it's equivalent to Mariupol or say Dnipropetrovsk or some of these other towns, Ivano-Frankivsk, that aren't quite, they're not huge metropolises, but they're big enough that lots of people live there. So it looks like that's where the next fight's going to happen, not at the Ukrainians, not in their playbook, not in their plans, but that's where we are. And but still, they're on that side of the river. The Russians are, and crossing that river is going to be a very difficult thing for them to achieve. And all the while, they get weaker and morale gets worse. And on the other side of the equation, more weapons are flooding into Ukraine, and morale is still pretty solid. And I don't see morale changing anytime soon. They know this is a fight for their life. So here in the capital, it's been relatively quiet. We had a couple of air raid sirens last night, but generally, it's okay. We're having a rainstorm right now.
Right. The most of the fighting that is changing, it seems, as far as tactical from the Ukrainian side, has been to move away from ticks, from troops in combat, to the holding lines and firing the HIMARS into, and the available artillery that's now moving into ammo depots specifically. So instead of the ground fights, they are ceding some of that ground as long as they can hold the river lines and the like you're talking about, and then pelting deep in country now that they can with the available munitions into the supply lines and the available ammo dumps that the Russians have been setting up over this time. There's been 7 of those major ones hit, which was sort of shocking in the last month. It seems like that's part of the clearing that they're doing. Now it's going to be, there's going to be an ebb and flow in this. Everybody expected that, July especially, because it wasn't until the end of this month, beginning of August, when the big heavy weapons that are being shipped there and that they're being trained on are getting into that area. Meanwhile, I don't know if you saw this. Julia Davies posted this, but the Chechen leader, this guy Magomed Daudov, who's the head of the Chechen battalions, says that first and foremost, this is a jihad for Islam.
We're not going to stop until we get to Berlin thing?
Yes. Yeah. So he said it's a jihad for Islam in Ukraine, and that they may not stop until they go all the way to Berlin. Now granted, that kind of lippy nonsense is expected. But at the same time, the idea that if you can imagine an American or even a European or a NATO battalion leader of any sort, basically saying we're not going to stop until we hit Beijing. And also we're not doing this for Orthodox Christianity like the Russians have been sold. Like we're
doing it for Islam.
Yeah, and therefore you're right.
You might want to coordinate on your messaging.
Exactly. And
all of this, by the way, while Kadyrov is back in Grozny, making silly videos mocking Zelensky.
Right.
But he's safe back in Grozny.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is, I I mean, we're not going to be surprised, I don't think, by a lot of the back and forth we'll see over the next 3 weeks in this particular situation. And the Biden administration is sending another $800 million worth of stuff this week. The Lend-Lease program itself, all the $40 billion that that was allocated earlier this year, a good half of that was dealing with refugees and stuff, and the other half was gear and the like. That doesn't necessarily include the Lend-Lease stuff that will be made available to the Ukrainians. That's on top of the Lend-Lease program, which got started maybe and 2 weeks later.
A lot of that money will not be in material from Lockheed Martin or Raytheon. In principle, a lot of that is actually going to go to NATO partners who have weapon systems that don't need a lot of training.
Right.
And some of that will come their way, and that'll be almost immediate.
Yeah.
I mean, look, the Ukrainians are gaining in strength while the Russians are exerting themselves as best they can to try and secure control over Donetsk, over the Donbass, now Donetsk, because Luhansk is basically taken. But, do they intend to now then sue for peace? Is that the idea? Because I'm telling you, the Ukrainians won't go for that. Is there some sort of secret play with Lukashenko and Belarusian troops? I still stand by my belief that would be, it's completely out of the realm of possibility.
Right.
And it would be disastrous for Lukashenko, but great for the Belarusians because they would rise up and finally get rid of him. We're in a dark point in the war, but I suspect will be one of the darkest points of the war, save the initial attack.
Right.
Because ultimately, when the counteroffensive, which is being put together, is finally launched, and it does look like it's going to be end of July, beginning of August. It's, look, that could be brought up or pushed back. But that's the kind of that's the ballpark time we're looking at here. And when that happens, we'll have to see whether or not the equipment is going to make the world of difference that many think it will, myself included. Will the Russians resist it? I mean, we know that the Russians' morale is not very good. And they have been through an absolute grindhouse. They've just been put, as the Russians are wont to do, they've been put through an awful lot. We'll see. Will they stand and fight when the Ukrainians come to reclaim the land, which is going to happen?
Yes. Agreed. And a lot of it will happen after, this is 4 hours ago, the Ukrainians hit a Russian munitions warehouse in Kherson, which is burning currently still. And it's thought to be one of the biggest ammo supply spots outside of Kherson. That is increasingly
there's a growing partisan. Yeah, there's a growing partisan army in Kherson. There is a resistance that is becoming more and more active in Kherson. That will be an interesting thing to keep an eye on, Kherson, because just the way it fell in the first place, the fact that it fell so quickly, the fact that there are all these things happening in terms of civil disobedience, which takes a lot of guts to do when there's a Russian occupier in your town. But I would suspect that Kherson becomes very active, and I think that there will be, when the counteroffensive is ready to launch against, retaking much of the territory that the Russians have taken. How effective will it be, and how resistant will the Russians be?
Right.
Let's see if I can get my glasses here.
Yeah, I've got a few questions in here.
Philip, always been,
Karen is saying on Facebook, Philip, she's saying, Philip, is there more the world can do short of declaring war on Russia? I would say yes, but as far as how the Ukrainians feel about it. Is there more the
Is there
world
more
can
the
do
world
short?
can do? You broke up a little bit there.
Yeah. So is there more the world can do short of declaring war on Russia? Is what they're asking. This is what Karen in our chat is asking.
No, and they don't. We don't need to declare war on Russia. We just keep sending the Ukrainians the weapons that they need, and they'll fight this war.
Yeah, they'll do it.
They'll do it. They're ready to do it. They want to do it. They want to finally get it through the Russians' skull that this is not a colony. This is. I said it on July 4th in a blog. I firmly believe this is a colonial war. This is a colonial war. For the Ukrainians, it's a war of independence, and for the Russians, it's a war of conquest. But it is a colonial war. They're trying to colonize Ukraine.
Right. Ed's 3D Tech is asking, is Belarus shipping ammo to Russia? And if so, what does that mean? I know they're picking up.
I thought it was the other way around.
They're taking.
I thought that they were positioning rockets and stuff, but not like ammunition in terms of small arms, but like moving in missile systems to try and pester and destabilize the West. I am not going to completely reject the idea that Lukashenko could do something, or that Russia could launch something from Belarus, but we would see that coming a mile off. But there is a strategic. The longer the weapons keep flowing into Ukraine, the worse and worse it's going to get for Russia. And one potential way of doing that is to, even if you're not going to cut off the border, which is going to be impossible, but destabilize the West so that weapon shipments are not as easily made.
Right.
I could see the motivation for that. I just don't think they have the capacity. I don't think either the Russians or the Belarusians have the means to come into the West while they're fighting as hard as they are out in Donbass. And having lost, I mean, they've lost so many tanks and just assets of all parts. And to those who say that, well, the Ukrainians say that they've sunk, or they've destroyed this amount of material, and the Russians say this, and who knows what the truth is. And I will tell you this one thing that makes me think I'm more likely to believe the Ukrainians is that it is indisputable that in the 4th month of this war, the Russians still do not own the sky.
Right. Which is very weird.
They don't have, which is the first thing that any modern military does when they're moving into if they're attacking somebody. You take control of the sky, because from the sky from there everything else follows. You can dominate the ground from the sky. And the fact that the Russians don't have it says to me that things are not going well for them, and that they don't have the capacity that everybody, that they said they did. Now, I know that from a variety of different reasons, but anybody out there who would argue that, oh no, the Russians are just whatever, they're holding back, or they've got some secret plan, or no, it's a lie how much they've lost. Why don't they control the airspace?
Right. Or telecommunications. Again, the fact that
telecommunications.
And largely that it's the air one is interesting, since the Ukrainians definitely have an air force, but it's limited, and it's much smaller than theirs, than the Russians by far. But the irony about the communications aspect is that Russians are using the cell towers and the infrastructure of the communication system in Ukraine to communicate. Without it, they couldn't. It's bizarre. Like that seems
because they don't have a proper internal communication system.
Right.
That runs. I mean, we've known this for years, but I don't think we knew until this war just how much that the corruption within all organs of power in Russia, frankly, but certainly within the military, would hamper them if they ever actually had to fight somebody. I mean, the wars that they've conducted in the last 20 years while Putin's been in charge has been Chechnya, Georgia, Syria, not arguably, but Syria.
Yeah.
Although, that was very much a different conflict because they were working with the Assad forces.
Right.
and now Ukraine, and of all of those locations, the only place that anybody's been able to have a backbone, that's not fair. The Georgians were ready and able to fight. They were. I mean, it's a country of 4 million people,
Right.
But the Ukrainians were the ones who were able to punch them in the nose,
Right.
and it reeled them. And I think it pulled away the curtain and revealed that they're not, because of so many different problems, they're not that great of a military. They're just not.
Right. Right. I don't know if you can see in the comments thing on your side. I put little stars next. I favorited some. Is there a way you can see the favorites in there?
Let's see.
On your yeah.
Oh, there we go again. Going sideways. Wait a minute. There it is.
All comments
now
are favorites.
I see it.
Yeah. So if you click on the favorites, that's the ones I've been kind of like grabbing questions. And you'll see some of them we've already covered, and some comments. One of the interesting things is that as the Barbara's asking, as Russia's stockpile of weapons runs lower and they're not replenished, will they become so desperate they push the nuke button? I don't think so. Honestly, like that's when that's the end. That's end time stuff. Like that's when they declare it a total failure, and that takes more ego than losing.
Yeah, and I think somebody pointed out over the weekend that so much of what is happening here is down to one man, and that's Vladimir Putin. And he's definitely, as he gets on in years and perhaps is seriously ill, he's looking at his legacy, and to be for his legacy to be the only other power that's used the nuclear weapon in a time of war, and especially to a neighboring country and the histories between these two countries, his legacy would be, he would not go down well in history, and I think even he knows that.
Right. There's also a report, by the way, that Russia has been blocking Kazakh oil going into Europe.
Yep, I've heard that too.
And they were using they're basically using technical reasons for stopping it. They're not doing it, they were basically doing it under the table. And that is a huge deal if that oil comes back online, as far as the price of oil and the availability of it to Europe as well as a satellite state. And again, Kazakhstan has the ability economically to rival, Russia proper with the amount of natural gas and oil it has. That's a huge fear point. And the Kazakh leader was at that St. Petersburg gathering, and he didn't look, first of all, he looked dead, but he also just did not look interested in anything that Putin had to say. He was basically sitting there with his arms crossed, looking, stone-faced the entire time. It says, court in Russia has ordered a 1-month suspension of operations at the pipeline used by Kazakhstan to export the bulk of its oil in a measure that analysts are interpreting as an intimidation from Moscow. In its July 5th ruling, the Primorsky District Court in the southern Russian of Novorossiysk found that the Caspian Pipeline Consortium had allegedly committed environmental violations. So, so Russia is shutting down the Kazakh pipeline to Europe, limiting Kazakh oil to Europe on environmental reasons, which we all totally buy.
Totally. Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Well, no, the ripple effects from this are going to be
enormous.
It's going to stretch out very far in places that we can't even anticipate at this time. It's good, and especially like the food crisis we've talked about. If they can't plant for next year's harvest because they can't get the current year's harvest to market because of the blockade, then we're going to see a slow-moving iceberg coming our way when it comes to hunger. But again, the Russians have spoken about how they want that to happen because cynically they think that famine is in their
right in their best interest.
Debt.
Right.
Yeah. So they're willing to have countless thousands starve to death. as long as they get their objective, their objectives met. It's
but
we
Vincent is
live in interesting times.
Yes. Also, currently in that story, I mean, there's multiple sources for that story about the blocking the Kazakh oil, but it is basically to get the oil price back up. And I would argue that since it happened yesterday and oil prices went up a 0.5 percentage point, you could relate that rise in oil prices more to that action than to any other geopolitical aspect or production level. That's enough to cause a 0.6 rise in the cost of a barrel of oil, is just that action by Russia, which means if they're at full capacity again, it will cause an equal or double drop once it's back on market. So all they're doing is stretching this rubber band back further towards their, while aiming it at their own eye. So, but that is the current story from them. So there's also, in line with that story about the Chechens saying this is an Islamic war, for all our friends who think we should have stayed in Afghanistan, and that's, having Bagram means we're 600 miles from where China makes nukes or some stupid argument. The Islamic State has officially declared a jihad, a war, on any Central Asian or Asian country doing business with the Taliban. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is China. It's also Russia on behalf of Kazakhstan or any of the intermediaries around there, because even though they have business dealings with Afghanistan that they want to have Uzbekistan and all these other countries, they do it with both Russia's approval and their guidance. So they've got to send people down there, and the target has moved off the back of the Americans to China and Russia now. The terror group behind the growing carnage in Afghanistan says anyone working with the Taliban is a target. Ever since they took control of Kabul last summer, Taliban has sought to assure neighboring countries that Afghanistan is open for business and that they can protect investments. Not so much. Islamic State is making that sales pitch harder. Take Tashkent's ambition to build a railway across, that's the Chinese company, build a railway across Pakistan that will connect Uzbekistan ports to Pakistan and link Central Asia to new markets. In recent months, top officials from Afghanistan and Uzbekistan have discussed moving forward with a survey. The World Bank has reportedly expressed interest. Taliban has promised security. The Islamic State Khorasan province, the ISKP, the terror group's local branch, which has claimed a volley of atrocities targeting civilians across Afghanistan last year, has vowed to kill anyone working on it. The Belt and Road Initiative that China is counting on to circumvent Russia in their contact with Europe is dead in the water going through Afghanistan. That means the only place they can go through is through Russia, which means Russia no longer has a choice. China is going to bully Russia into being the main thoroughfare for the Belt Road Initiative. They have bought the commercial rail line running through Moscow. If Mexico bought the commercial rail line running through from Philadelphia and DC to New York City, every American's head would be on fire. I
hope. I wish the Chinese good. Well, I don't know if I wish them good luck, but they may be taking on something that I don't know if they fully comprehend. I mean, Russia has tried to train a land route from Vladivostok that's effective to Moscow for centuries.
Right.
To try and go through. I mean, that was my understanding. That was part of the reason why they were looking at a whole bunch of different options than going through Siberia, because that is deeply inhospitable land many months of the year, and a land route from the Pacific all the way to Moscow and then out. I mean, it's a reason why we ship. This is a reason why we don't go over land in Russia. You go, you ship it because it's very inhospitable land. So I don't know if they really think that they can do something that the Russians themselves haven't been able to do for centuries.
Well, then, they have to go through Kazakhstan. They have to go through Kazakhstan to do it, and so they've been making deals with Kazakhstan. And the interesting thing is, with the idea that they need to go through Russia and up into St. Petersburg and out to the Baltic Sea, and that will be the through route on this, or go around the top of Russia through, so taking advantage of Russian icebreakers to make their own route. The problem they have is that once they got to Kazakhstan and started making the deal, what China recognized to some degree was they didn't need, in theory, if the Afghan route works, they don't need to go all the way to Russia to solve the problem route-wise. And so they could just make a deal with Kazakhstan, which is a nightmare for Russia. And it's amazing, like, that they seem incapable of recognizing, like, or maybe, I mean, they have to know, that China has to know that this is terrible for them when Kazakhstan and China start trading in oil, because Kazakhstan isn't under the sanctions. They can send oil to China. They can send oil to Europe. They can, highest bidder. They don't have to compete with the low price that Russia is getting from China on the black market. They can sell it in the open market and get it the top dollar price for it. Why would they undercut their own oil and sell it to China right now when they can sell it to Europe, which is why Russia is shutting down that pipeline? Because they know that's exactly, I got to say.
Yeah, it's a mess. They're screwed. They're deeply, deeply screwed.
Yeah.
There's no good solution for them.
None. I find that part fascinating. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
And then let me grab. We have a bunch more questions in here too, but I was stuck on that story.
I can't see the. I can only see comments and guest chat. I don't see the ones you've been isolating.
So you don't see the favorite ones? Okay, cool. So yeah,
favorite one. No.
Gotcha. Okay. Ed 3D Tech was asking again if you could ask Phil if he knows how Russia was getting modern chips for their electronics. They were getting them. They were getting them.
Yeah,
from us, from everybody, but now they can't get them at all.
Singapore, Taiwan, they'll get wherever they could. They don't have the means to do it domestically. That's the problem. So no, they're not. This is a major issue for them. They're not getting new chips, and so look, there's.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see any good solution or resolution for Russia in this conflict.
Right.
So right now, things do look bleak. The Donbass is definitely going to fall into their hands, at least for the time being. But ultimately, there's no good solution for them here.
No.
It was a terrible, idiotic decision to try and take this on for Putin.
Right. I also there are a few Russian vloggers that I watch on YouTube who have been kind of doing what it's life under sanctions videos since the beginning. Like they started, I think maybe last week of February, first week of March, really like posting regularly about what it was like. And the beginning of it was like, nothing. There's no, sanctions aren't really doing much. They're kind of, I don't know, what's the big deal? And lately, they've been looking at the price of like oranges going through the roof and regular foodstuffs that Russia does not make at all. Like they don't, like there are not orange groves in Russia. That's not how it works. And those kind of foodstuffs, which they're highly reliant on, just like everybody else, are just evaporating. And the price is going through the roof very quickly. And again, they're at 21% inflation right now. And it's something in the order of like 12% month over month. Like that's Venezuelan like numbers. And I noticed a very distinct difference in the quality of the conversation that they were having in these videos this month versus last month. Genuinely in early June, a lot of them were still going like, well, it's not great, but we'll make do, and it's not that big a deal. And this month, it's getting into nightmare scenario, and it's that change was very quick. It was like you're saying, it's a long glide, and then it snaps. That seems to be the way things happen in Russia.
Yeah, and about 2 weeks ago, they were making all this kind of commotion about how stores were coming back and international brands were just being sold off into Russian hands, and nothing's really going to change. Look at the
Right.
stores in the shop, in the shopping malls, or they're reopening. They're just rebranding their various names, but that is just a temporary moment in time. It's going to get really, really.
I was shocked
It's
by.
going to get a lot worse.
I was shocked by the mood of these people. And it was that was probably the one thing that shifted the most, like video to video. It was like watching one of those found footage horror films where everybody's having a no big deal and then one of the party disappears and then suddenly it's really serious. It felt like that distinct difference. One of the people was saying that they think China is sending Russia chips. They are, but China doesn't make, if you don't include Taiwan, which I don't because Taiwan's a country, the chips that are made in China are toy level. They are not the kind you find in high precision warfare, not high precision computers, none of that stuff. And the United States just made a deal with Norway to keep them from sending the chip printing gear that Norway makes to keep them from selling it to China. And that's not even the top of the line stuff. That's the mid-level stuff. That's the Lenovo laptop sort of, or DJI drone stuff, which is still great, but it's not the kind you need.
Put it in a fighter jet.
Not at all. Yeah, you'll die. And that distinction is very important. So we're aware of this because the bank shot would be through China, and we're keeping that from happening currently.
Is Ukraine getting our Iron Dome tech? No, they're not going to get Iron Dome. They're getting another anti-missile system, which is it's like a generation or two. No, not a generation. It's not a Patriot or an Iron Dome, but it's similar technology. It's shorter range. It's short and mid range, but it'll at least knock some things that are flying in. And knocking down the cities, because Russia's definitely been trying to overwhelm their air defenses here. So it'll be welcome.
Yeah, there was in the WWE, one of the big wrestlers tore down a Russian flag, and it was censored in China, or which is fascinating. But the idea, that we're sort of back to like Cold War wrestling world. It's pretty fascinating how it's percolating down into the general zeitgeist while you got the MTGs of the world trying to defend Russia. Also, remind everybody, if you would, Philip, about the butcher of Aleppo, the Russian commander who they put in, they moved up.
Yeah. They brought him in about 2 months ago to try and. It was at the height of Mariupol. They brought him in, and he was not effective. He has not been effective. I think he's still alive and kicking. There was a report that he got caught in an incident, but he hasn't been removed from his command. So, but he was supposed to come in and use the same techniques that they were using in Aleppo, and kill vast numbers of Ukrainians mercilessly, sort of thing.
So
that
he was
his
brought.
Reputation.
Right.
But he came here and he found out that the Ukrainians are actually capable fighters, and they defended themselves against. Until this thing with Lizzie Chance, we haven't seen them changing their tactics very much.
Yeah, they brought him in May, and then Putin fired him in June on June 25th.
Did he get fired?
Yes.
When I was down in Odessa.
Dvornikov, is that his name?
Dvornikov, yeah.
So Dvornikov, it came in, he served about a month, and then they fired him. And this is the guy, by the way, who was helping the Syrian Air Force the helicopter guys from the Tiger Patrol drop chlorine canisters on civilians to terrorize and kill them. So 98% of the chemical attacks that happened in Syria during the Syrian civil war came from the Tiger Battalion, this particular helicopter group of about 5 helicopters that were flown out of Damascus and would do this. And they would basically fly, because the Syrians did not have, the Syrian rebels did not have any anti-aircraft defense to speak of. So these aircraft, they'd fly 3,000 feet above the range of any missiles that they had, and they would drop these chlorine canisters, basically commercially available chlorine canisters. They put a ring around them with like fins to try and stabilize them. But since they didn't really care where they landed, because they were just there to terrorize and kill civilians, it wasn't like a precision target thing. They would just get generally over it and drop the thing. He was the guy who was working with them to put fins on it just to make them a little more, better at targeting. That was his, his, and then the institution of, technically, sarin gas, when the U.S. and everybody and the Russians brokered this deal with Syria to get rid of their chemical weapons. Remember that? They crossed the red line, and then they destroyed all their chemical weapons. Chlorine doesn't count because it has a material use everywhere else. So chlorine is not counted in the chemical weapons treaty ban. And since all they do is drop the canisters from the air, I guess they could claim there was a chlorine canister in this apartment building that just blew up for whatever reason, but it creates about 25,000 cubic feet of chlorine gas, which in human lungs turns into hydrochloric acid. And that's the guy they brought in May to try and push back on Ukraine.
He never made. He never made a lick of difference.
Nope.
He didn't do a dang thing. Nothing changed.
And part of it was because all the strategy of using their helicopter brigades failed, because you kept seeing all these low-flying helicopters getting shot out of the air, because the Ukrainians do have the javelins. They do have the MRAPs. They do have the ability to push back against, the helicopter forces that would do this. And since these kinds of chemical munitions aren't useful from too high up, because they'll explode or dissipate, you can shoot them. If it takes them over 30 seconds to fall, you can blow them out of the sky and they dissipate. It's not a big deal. So you have to fly in and do them. But they could never get those helicopters close enough to the civilian areas to pull it off without losing a helicopter, and it wasn't worth it to them. And so out went that dude. Hi, Chad. So the man pads. Thank you, Lucius.
They're and they're still flying. The Ukrainians are still flying their Mi-24s and their fixed-wing aircraft. They're, to be this far into this conflict and not own the skies just shows you that their doctrine is a mess. And I was talking with a guy who really fixates on the war itself, the fighting. Whereas I try to do a little bit more comprehensive stuff. He's really about grids and who's doing what and where. And his commentary about the artillery duel that's been going on is that while the Russians have a larger capacity, their doctrine is so antiquated that they're still doing, grid on map. You got to call it in. It's not on the same chain of command. You got to call it to an artillery battalion. It's not integrated. So it takes them, so their response time is measured in, tens of minutes, up to, an hour kind of response time. And the Ukrainians are, completely high tech and are able to, it's a trite tactical idiom they use to, shoot and scoot. But they really do. The Ukrainians keep moving their artillery around a lot and are using much more precise grid response time so that they can actually, if one of their units comes into contact and they need artillery support, they can respond quite quickly. Whereas the Russians tend to, take a lot, and they're also just structured differently than what the Ukrainians have now structured their artillery. Every unit has a mortar team with it. Basically, they have at least some indirect fire capability, and that goes all the way up to about the brigade level, where they have integrated into their at the platoon level, battalion level. They have artillery integrated in, so they can immediately call in fire.
Yeah.
And the Russians just are using old style Soviet. We're going to take a grid. We're going to blast that grid. We're going to move our conscripts up. Then we're going to move our artillery up. Then we're going to blast the grid. And then our conscripts are going to move into that grid. And that's how they've been slow walking the Donbass. But we have to acknowledge that this Lysychansk maneuver, where they were using airborne and all sorts of other different elements, that is the first time I have seen them significantly change doctrine and tactics during this war. The only other change that's happened is just their strategic goals when they decided to pull out of Kiev. So, I can't see the questions that I haven't answered because sorry.
Yeah, that's right. There's lots. I'd like to get your take on the BRIC meeting idea. That's been like that just happened, and these their attempts to try and create their own little side gathering, their own petrodollar, those kind of ideas. I find it hilarious.
They're going to stop taking dollar. Is that whole thing? Yeah, because India and China never have any issues. Russia, India, and China, they all get along just great. I mean, hey, if they can make it happen.
Yeah, they. This is I forget who's this. Yeah, there is so much about the idea that Iran and China and Russia will create their own cryptocurrency, effectively a value coin pegged to one of their economies. Presumptively, the idea would be that China's is the biggest, therefore the safest to do that with. But China's on a trajectory towards absolute financial collapse. They are doing everything they can to shore it up, but it's not going to work. Yeah.
No. I mean, they're not going to be able to do that.
No,
they can try.
It's not happening.
But it'll be devastating for them financially. Somebody asked what's happened to the bridge between Crimea and Russia. It still stands, but interestingly enough, about 4 days ago, we had this whole exercise where they released a smoke generator to obscure the bridge. The general thinking is that they think that the Ukrainians are going to try some sort of air assault, and they're trying to defend the bridge with smoke generators.
Yeah, like they won't be able to find the bridge.
Is a traffic jam, but yeah,
they're not going to be able to find the bridge. That's just like it's in their own country. It's like hoping that the fog covers the Golden Gate Bridge. They won't be able to shoot it.
Yeah,
like they don't need like all these instruments. All these missiles are instrument driven. They're all blind. Like the idea is just silly. I honestly don't get it. Like I don't get why they think this will work. Maybe it's
clutching at straws.
Yeah. There is a this is from an article on Rusi.org that relating to this kind of the future of the Middle East and how Russia is going to be intertwined with it. It was written in 97. People kind of looking back on people's perception of it. It says, it was inconceivable when Vladimir Putin lambasted Lenin for encouraging Ukrainians to think of themselves as a distinct people in 21 of February, that the war clouds over Kiev would sweep Beijing, Tehran, and New Delhi to the rim, if not the eye of the storm. India, Iran, and China cannot wish this conflict away as their wagons remain hitched to the invading power for complicated reasons. Iran is not, as Khrushchev wished, the rotten apple fallen into Russia's lap. Putin is frequently obliged to cajole Tehran, and the two countries' 200-year-old ties have been punctuated by occupation war. However, both autocracies thrive on self-righteous, anti-hegemonic posturing, contra the liberal rules-based norms of governance and interstate relations. Both, like China, have a single enemy, democratic activism in the language of liberal democracy, as Ann Applebaum stated in BBC's Newsnight. In the ongoing negotiations over return to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JACPOA, or whatever, a sunset clause in 2025 is sought by messianic mullahs as eagerly as hidden imams return. Meanwhile, Iranian President Abraham Raisi dismisses reviving the agreement because Tehran has, according to Abbas Tafani, ex-head of the Iranian Atomic Energy Organization, a system to create a nuclear weapon. Uranium enrichment at the end of 2021 stood at 60%. They are not going to need Russian backup in their minds, either if they have a nuclear weapon or a deal at some point. So they're like Pakistan at this point. Pakistan is nutty enough to think they don't need anybody. Their economic problems are a totally different slice, and Tehran will still have to deal with that fact. And the only reason Tehran at this point wants a nuke is to protect themselves from potentially being nuked by Israel first. They are in their own little mini Cold War in their regard, like Russia getting a nuke when the United States started getting them at this point.
Russia, we're all. I think everybody also is going to have to wait and see what happens to Russia after they lose this war.
Yeah.
And until that eventuality comes to pass, or look, war is a tricky thing. If somehow Russia were able to pull a rabbit out of its hat and succeed here, which I think is a very, very low percentage chance that that's going to actually happen. I just don't see it.
Right.
But the world is going to have to wait and see who and what Russia is after this war.
Right. Or who they say they're going to be and whether we believe it.
Can be made.
That's the other thing, too, is they're going to say who they are. But after the 91 fall, my argument has been that whatever good intentions Yeltsin might have had or Gorbachev might have had, ultimately, Putin and his ilk looked at this as a rope-a-dope. And we're like, we just need to bide our time until we can build strategically back up to where we can snap this trap. And there's no two ways about it. Like, if they come back and say, you know what, we were wrong, we're out of Ukraine, we're not going to do that stuff anymore, just let us go back to, to snafu, situation normal, all fucked up, and we'll be nice. I just don't see the world buying into it for years.
Nope.
while they continue to grind this down. I mean, it would be idiotic of us to naively walk into that again the way we did in the 90s leading into 2000s.
Well, I mean, we did not handle the fall of the Soviet Union very well. The West in general did not handle the fall of the Soviet Union in a well thought out plan way. Yeah. I think we were also shocked with the speed with which it fell.
Yeah.
That there weren't proper plans put in place on how to deal with Russia post-Soviet Union.
And there has to be.
And there had to have been. There really should have been. Because instead what they got were a bunch of carpetbaggers. And also this sense of like, well, that conflict's done. Now let's move on to something else.
Right.
Forgetting that Russia was never going to just disappear.
And that there needed to be a Marshall Plan.
Yeah, there needed to be a Marshall Plan. Absolutely, 100%. And I've said it before, instead of our system going east, their corrupt, autocratic, mafia state fled into the West and corrupted us in a lot of different, go to New York, go to Paris, go to London, you're going to find a lot of Russian money, a lot of it. And most of it gotten through ill-gotten gains. And the infection is bad. And in some ways, maybe it's a good thing that the veneer of any kind of thought that you can deal with a guy like Putin, or indeed a country like Russia, which is, I love Russia. I have a lot of good friends there. I see the beauty and the wonder of Russia and the majesty of it all, and it's an amazing country of global heritage, but it
However,
is deeply troubled. It is a
yeah,
deeply troubled
well,
land.
you feel the same way about Russia that I feel about China. I love the people. I love the embedded culture, what still exists of it. I love the history and to some degree the people's respect for that history when they have it. I love their in mass. There's so many people there. You can find almost any kind of person there, and that's a great sign of a country. The problem is you're not allowed to be any kind of person there. And increasingly over the last 10 years, I would argue that that trap has snapped shut as well. That was at least from the end of Deng Xiaoping, that there's been a movement towards we need to get back to a form of controlled, authoritarianism. It's much closer to Maoism, but people are enjoying this opening so much. We can't do this quickly. It's going to take a while. And then to some degree, for all the talk that lockdowns in the States allowed government control or some nonsense, which is absolutely not the fact, because if you look at the American response to it or the Western world's response to it, you saw a mix of responses. It wasn't something where everybody just went, anytime the government tells me to go inside, I'm now going to do it. Like, it's silly. Like, nobody thought that. But in China, that's what they're attempting. And it's with much more draconian measures. And they're using this to try and recreate that authoritarianism quicker.
Right. And then in Russia, what happened was after the period of carpetbaggers, and when Putin came back in, and he said, all of you guys that have been selling everything off to the Westerners, you either come on board with me and you can pay me tribute instead of to Exxon or BT. You're going to pay me a cut, and we'll moderate it through the state. And the Russians, by and large, when Putin came to power, were like, we just don't want the instability of the last decade to continue. We can't take it any longer. We will give up some of our future, our rights, our civil liberties, as long as you bring us stability, and as long as you clamp down on some of the the more egregious corruption problems. Not that he ever actually did anything about that, but he did like big picture corruption. The oligarchs did have to heel to his control, to his command. He became either in a feudalistic system or a mafia don, whichever, either he's Baron Putin or he's Don Putin, whichever you want to take it. But that's what he made. And the Russians were willing to do that. But now what he's done in one fell swoop by attacking Ukraine is he has all Russians know that their future is not bright. They may deny it. They may be coping with it, but down deep, they've got to know they're in for a really hard period of time, and it's probably not going to let up anytime soon. And the deal was, you bring us stability, we'll turn a blind eye to your basically creating an autocratic, corrupt mafia state. But as long as I have my dacha, as long as I can raise my kids, take the occasional trip to the seaside, fine. As long as I, without those corrupt oligarchs running around and shoving it in our faces.
Well, the thing is, again, most of the time
we're willing to let it go. And now he's just burnt that contract up.
Right. Well, and also a mafia family taking over a criminal enterprise or a series of criminal enterprises in a neighborhood that might involve a lot of like stick-ups and underground stuff and a lot more random violence as opposed to structured violence. Once that happens, it can seem to the people who live in that neighborhood, for example, that things are much more functional and peaceful, and that paying tribute to that gang or that mob is a small price to pay compared to how things were. And that usually carries on until such time as the mob decides, well, we don't want a piece of just the illegal business. We want a piece of the legit business as well. And effectively, that's what you have with Russia and China right now. So China's getting 50% of all legit business, period. And Russia was doing it by like, we'll replace those lazy slapdash oligarchs with our much more uniformed oligarch. I'll pick who can run that stuff. They'll still take the graft. They'll still screw the whole thing up, but they'll do it in a way that's not so obvious. Their yachts will be parked elsewhere. They'll all have, national whatever incomes of like $120,000, like Shoigu or whatever, and $18 million houses. But we won't talk about it as much. We'll keep it hidden. Well, Putin himself will pretend that he lives in an apartment in Moscow, right? Which nobody believes. But yeah.
Well, and also there was a bit of prestige to having Russia be out there on the global stage, even if it was only the Russian elites. You would have Russian, the daughters of Russian oligarchs doing, stupid music videos down the streets of Paris or on their yachts in Hvar in Croatia. But the message would be, look at, Russia is back on the stage. It's back in the world. We're rich. We're throwing our money around. We're throwing our power around. That's good for us as a country, sort of mentality. Right. It wasn't really, they didn't really think about the massive oligarchic corruption. The corruption that bothers them the most is their day-to-day corruption. When you get pulled over by a traffic cop and he says, if you just give me 200 extra rubles, we'll just consider it a fine.
Right.
And then that goes right in his pocket.
And that, by the way, the existence of that in the United States is a hilarity right now. But in the early 1970s, you could expect a certain amount of that. And depending on where you were, mostly in the South, mostly in rural areas, the kangaroo courts of that are made fun of in Nothing But Trouble, the Dan Aykroyd movie, in Vulcanvania in New Jersey, where you're driving down the turnpike and it's just speed trap after speed trap, and they just, enact some sort of personal justice on you. Like, that's now the thing of comedy. Like, the idea that you could even get away with it is absurd right now. Whereas in Russia, still to this day, you're flipping a coin, in theory, if you're pulled over.
Oh, yeah.
And that's why a lot of them have those dash cams.
And and if you go in and you need a license for an extension on your house, if you need, anything, basically, if you want to involve the state, somebody's going to get a kickback.
Yeah,
and that's the corruption that bothers them the most on the street level. But there's also this massive corruption that is. But the problem is that the massive oligarchic corruption bleeds down through the rest of the strata. If you make a system where it's the oligarchs and how they operate, and if you don't play that game, then you're kicked out of the game. Then the guys, the level below them, are also then compelled to also play by the same rules, because they're hoping to go up the ladder.
Right.
So and then it sits down, it sits down, it sits down, and again, many Russians were able to turn a blind eye to a lot of this.
Yes.
Also, when they thought that it was going to be stability, but Putin is bringing a lot of problems.
Right. It's going to be fascinating when this not only doesn't solve, it makes the average Russian's life worse in general because of this attack on Ukraine, because of this choice by Putin to do something like this. But on top of that, it still doesn't solve their demographic problem. It still doesn't solve the fact that they are doomed to a future of a decreasing worth in their resources. That being so oil and gas focused, when demand destruction is happening all over the world, that these are the countries that are going to collapse the quickest. That's why the Saudis have so much money in U.S. savings bonds, in government bonds, and in the stock market. It's because it has more of a future than oil does, and they know this. And they're running out. Eventually, it's going to dry up because it's a natural resource that goes away, but it's also going to outlive its usefulness. There's still going to be, shale oil and fracking-based oil that is used, well into the future. I put up a story, I don't know if you saw it, Philip, I tweeted it out, about scientists in the States working with a scientist in Australia, have been working back and forth on basically a streptococcus-based jet fuel, that using a bacteria that you find in the soil that you can grow in a lab, they can make jet fuel out of it. It just makes itself. You just let it sit long enough, and it is a version of the process that oil was made out of over the course of millennia. It's kind of like synthesized diamonds. It's synthesized oil in the same way that you can synthesize a diamond nowadays. Nowadays, diamonds can be made on the cheap, just out of carbon. It's not even that big an industrial product at all. They're just, people will go pure diamonds out of the ground, have something special to them, but not the ones we actually need to live, like ones that are used for diamond tip drills and for, the coming nano batteries that I've been talking about. But they figured out how to synthesize jet fuel. That was one of the last fuel sources that everybody was clamoring about when it came to, we need aviation fuel for transport. Oil and gas is necessary because, we can get electric cars, but we don't have electric planes that will last, and, nobody wants to run out of, battery power while they're flying. So jet fuel will always be a problem. Well, they just solved that. In 3 years, they're going to be able to produce enough of it for the industry. In 3 years. That's, what do you do if you're Russia and you have, everything is reliant on oil and gas? Everything. It's embarrassing.
Yeah. Well, it's short-sighted. Grab what you can today. Look, not to get too deep into the cultural differences between East and West, but there is a definite sense of fatalism within Russian culture, where they're just like, I don't know what's going to come in a week, a month, a year, but I know that I can grab this thing here right in front of me today, and I'll do it. Mm-hmm. Always used to drive me nuts when I was living over there. It's like, if you just, if you can look beyond tomorrow, then maybe you can start to build. Right. And eventually you don't have to be grabbing the thing that's right in front of you, because you'll have an infrastructure that'll eventually, you can diversify, you can invest in your people, as opposed to seeing them as basically just a means to an end for whatever you're trying to produce. Right. But rather, if you could build something that would last beyond 6 months, or a year, 10 years, whatever. The Russians do not look, unlike, a lot of people go on about how, Islam, when we were fighting these wars around the around the Ummah, the kind of Islamic parts of the world, lots of people would say, yes, but you don't understand. There's an Islamic, there's this edict, this idea of like, they have the watches, but we have the time. We're going to outlast you invaders and you infidels. Where eventually Allah will be the ascendant, and Muhammad, peace be upon him, will be, that'll be the religion of the world. We just have to wait you out, sort of thing. So they do have a long-term, like, eventually we'll get there mentality. Whereas the Russians are like, I don't know what's going to happen next week. I don't know. I don't care. I'm going to grab this thing. Whatever this is. If I can rip it out of the ground and sell it to somebody, I don't care the result of what it means when I rip it out of the ground. I got something I can sell to you today.
And on an evolutionary level, it's a zero-sum game. And this is the problem, by the way, of sort of forced atheism in China, structural atheism within the government, that they've taken a country of people who largely were focused on the belief that somebody up there or in the ground or in the mountain was watching you, and you better not do some awful or try to do your best, because the monks were the representatives, just like priests and ministers were for years as well. But that forced belief about that is very much aligns. They were chasing that from Russia, and they got it. They got that. They were the dog that caught the car when it came to getting your people to believe like Russians do. So there is this fatalism in China that's very similar. And there's this idea in Marxism that if you copy something exactly and it fails, it's not your fault. And so if you change it or improve on it and it doesn't work, that's on you. And so there's no incentive under Marxist thought to make stuff better, even without a profit motive, because socially, governmentally, as your worth in the community goes.
I mean, there's the other joke. Yeah, I don't think it was a joke. I think there's some truth to this, that when Nixon went over to the Soviet Union, he was getting toured around by Khrushchev. At one point, somebody in the delegation, the American delegation, said something to the Soviet communist delegation. He said, so what is this all about? How's this all? Well, at the end of the day, basically, we pretend to work and they pretend to pay us.
Right.
That kind of mentality was it's like, you don't have to improve what is coming to work. Just make sure that the party apparatchiks are that they're meeting their quotas, and we'll all just pretend this thing, and then it all, of course, came crashing down. Not least of much because of pressure from outside in the West, but also just because that system is deeply flawed. You do have to invest in your people and your country to make it better, because presumably there will be. You have to operate on the idea that there will be a future, and you can build for a better one.
That's right. By the way, thank you, Aaron West, for the Venmo. I just saw that. Thanks very much. By the way, if you want to support the show, Venmo's up there. Of course, patreon.com/HalSparks helps the morning show exist. Currently, Philip is our only morning guest at all. He's actually technically my only guest, since Johnny Million is a part of our regular squad on the radio show. This was interesting. RS Express says, I was wondering if maybe the smoke on the bridge was to conceal them transporting something they didn't want anyone to see, like tactical nukes. They would bring those in more than likely via boat to the area, so they wouldn't have to bring it across the land necessarily. It's always possible, but it wouldn't be necessary in that regard.
No, I think that was. I think that was defensive in nature. I do not think that was. I don't think it was
it was just
plan
dumb
for them to right. Well, they are afraid that they're going to land a couple of choppers on there and blow it up.
Right.
The Ukrainians have been pretty open about their desire to destroy that bridge.
Right.
So they know it's in the Ukraine. The Russians know that bridge is in the Ukrainians' crosshairs. Yeah. But how the Ukrainians would do it,
Right. I also think that they are trying desperately. The Russians are trying desperately, and Lysychansk is part of this, trying desperately to kill as many Ukrainians individually as possible and shy away from the bigger bombings that were killing civilians and the like, because they know if they ever decide, well, we're just going to keep the Donbass and Crimea for ourselves and we'll stop there and we'll negotiate a peace and all that kind of stuff, that if they continue to do that stuff, that's off the table. I think it's off the table now. I think they're fooling themselves, but they think if they have any chance at all, it will be based on all their fighting was tick fighting, was just troops in contact for the most part, and regular artillery fire and the like, rather than firing deep into Lviv and deep into Kiev and deep into Odessa and those kind of things. I think they're starting to write that off as a possibility and are going, well, what if we secure this? We just absorb it into Russia. And which is weird, because then that part of Ukraine becomes a member of EU, largely, becomes NATO, because it's no longer that area is now part of Russia. And then they've got NATO on their doorstep. I don't understand. It's always been BS, but it's just where it gets silly at that point. Because if they take over all of Ukraine, Poland's on their doorstep. The rest of Moldova is on their doorstep. That's not. It's always been garbage.
That's an excuse. It's only an excuse, and it's transparently so. It's not that they're not worried about NATO expansion. It's prestige, and it's also the strategic depth that they want out of Ukraine because of the way. I mean, this is a very you can traverse this land pretty easily if you're going to come after Moscow. So, there's that. But then also, in addition to that, they've always just seen Ukraine as part of their empire. They don't want to see an independent Ukraine. It's been an issue for them for centuries.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody I saw is how do they deal with sending back dead dead soldiers or wounded. That is a huge problem for the Ukrainians, actually, because they aren't taking back their dead. The Ukrainians are having to store these corpses because they're not. There's no effective systemic way that they're taking back their dead, and so that's causing problems for the Ukrainians. The wounded are going back, of course. There's all sorts of weird stories that are being leaked out of Russia about guys being like propped up and giving medals and said, "Oh, he's a hero of Russia," and the guy's like, "I didn't do anything. This is ridiculous. He is like survivor's guilt kind of thing. It's like he goes through the war, sees a bunch of his fellow soldiers die. He happens to make it back in one piece. They pin a medal on him, and he's like, I didn't do anything." And I've heard a couple of different stories about that. There's the BBC did a really good, solid news magazine about this, the television news magazine thing about this, where they went to, darn it, where was it? Primorsk?
Mm-hmm.
Someplace, a military town. And they just followed a couple of different units, and people coming back, and their units are just absolutely demolished. There's no getting away. There's no turning away from the fact that when you send a unit with 300 men and 150, 200 of them come back, you got to know things aren't going well.
Something's wonky, even in the reality of, again, like taking Lysychansk and all this stuff, and the fact that they are just shoving all these people to the front line to give this sort of overwhelming physical force, when in reality, behind that, just a couple miles behind them, there is no one. There are most of the time, there used to be this story about the Scots when they fought one of the biggest battles between them and England and retained a big chunk of land. They were completely outnumbered by the English forces. And back in those days, you picked the battlefield, you showed up, and everybody agreed to fight. And they said, 3 days, we're going to meet you on this battlefield. And the English showed up early and got set up. They set up their tents. They arranged their horses. They did all this stuff. The Scots were completely outnumbered. So what they did was they had every piper and every drummer in the area start playing and marching towards the battlefield 2 days before in rotation. So it was almost 24 hours a day. And when they got there, the English had retreated because the soldiers were so afraid that if that's the size of the band, imagine how big the army is. And that's part of, it's similar to the front line in the east of the Russians right now. And the Ukrainians, there's a lot of reasons why, I'm not as fatalistic about the Lysychansk and those kind of areas as some people, mainly because I think we've got, as much as the Russians don't own the air, the Ukrainians have drones looking at almost everything. It's stunning how much drone coverage they have of the east. And what they're finding out, what's obvious to anybody who's paying attention to this, is that the front lines are thick with people. Definitely human to human, the Ukrainians are outnumbered person to person, but only because everybody is in the front and on the Russian side. And you can't do that for long. And that's why they're able to bomb these facilities, because there's nobody to move the gear once they know they've been targeted. If they hit one of the buildings, they can't go, they know where we are, and start the process of dismantling and moving camp, because there's literally not enough personnel to do it, because they're all at the front. And that's a nightmare scenario over time. It is, and I honestly, there's
another reason why I'm not. I recognize that Lysychansk is not a good thing. It's a defeat.
Yeah.
There's no putting a shine on that one. There's no way of dressing that up. Mariupol, Severodonetsk, to a certain degree, even Kharkiv. I mean, they did what they were intending to do. They made the Russians dance to their tune.
Right.
Lysychansk is disturbing because that is definitely a Russian win. But ultimately, the reason why I'm not distressed by the loss of Donbass is because, and it's something I've said since the beginning of this war, is that even if the Russians are able to win military victories here, the Ukrainians will keep. There will go to a partisan war. If the partisan war doesn't work, there'll be an insurgency. If the insurgency doesn't work, there'll just be civil disobedience. They will never, ever stop resisting the Russians. So the fact that they're still fighting a conventional war, they have a number of different options to keep going as long as Russia wants to keep going here. But they will never defeat them in terms of their spirit, because, and that's not just happy clappy, oh, they're determined to win. This is an existential threat. The Russians want to destroy. I said it earlier. This is a war of colonization. They're trying to colonize this country. They're trying to turn it into a type of a type of Ukraine through Russia's prism and its vision of what Ukraine is supposed to be. That's not what the vision for Ukraine the Ukrainians have for their own country. So, they're not going to stop. They're not going to stop fighting. And that's why ultimately I'm not worried.
No. And I also think that, and we're at the end of the show, and I just want to thank you for coming on today and let you go enjoy the rainstorm, the light drizzle or whatever that's going on. And hopefully we'll be able to talk to you on Saturday, get another update on stuff that's going on there as well. Sure. But NATO, the big move in NATO, of course, the last 24 hours is that Turkey has dropped its objection to Finland and Sweden joining NATO. So that's moving forward. That again is an enormous step. And what that was based on was the fact that, as much as, remember when Trump was saying all that shit about, like, made right here in America, the best military, but okay, the F-35 is made in 8 different countries, and Turkey is one of them. Parts of it are made in these, that's part of the project. You're in on the making of the F-35, and we'll share it with you. You can't get our F-16s and F-18s and other fight, but we're not going to give you our stealth fighters. But the F-35 will be sort of a NATO plane. We'll all put it together to get, together. And one of the rules is you can't do business with Russia or any adversarial groups like China in your tech around these kind of things if you're going to be part of the F-35 group. And Turkey had started working with the Russians on some stuff, and that made it so that they violated that agreement. And so we put limitations on them being part of that process. We have dropped that limitation effectively because even though they have,
that's probably what they wanted.
That's all they wanted. It's all they wanted. And here's the thing. It doesn't matter anymore because of the state Russia is in. They can't be engaged in that that behavior that violates the group agreement, because they can't do any kind of interaction with Russia about this kind of stuff. It's just done. So, because they're a part of NATO, on a geostrategic region, that is a hard line rule now. So they can automatically be back in that. So they didn't really win anything. All they did is go back to the status quo. But we went through the active push of doing that. That's gonna. I mean, it's a year probationary. Finland, Sweden, but they're basically in. It's counted as that because all the shit's going to start moving in there.
Excellent militaries,
no question. The only worry I have is that once Finland starts getting NATO stuff or starts building up its things, and Russia has started pulling troops away from the Finnish border that they've had there for a long time because of this, for fear that their troops will act out or to, act like it's no big deal in Finland. We don't care. We're not worried about Finland. Something along those lines. But also that, they know that the Finns don't fuck around. So there's going to be, if they decided to do anything gnarly with them, it's next level. And now that they're part of NATO, it's different. Like they definitely feel nervous about being pushy towards
it's
NATO
not going to be
countries.
like the DMZ on the Korean Peninsula,
Exactly.
where an occasional exchange of fire, nobody, it doesn't lead to anything. But
That's
since
right.
Finland's going to be NATO, you shoot a Finnish soldier and kill him. We're in a really difficult situation.
Right. And Biden
So
spoke.
I could see them pulling off at that line.
Right. Biden spoke to.
So
Brittany.
I'm gonna leave you there, Hal.
Yeah.
Thank you everybody for coming and listening to me. Go check out my vlogs.
Yeah.
I'm in the midst. So I haven't been posting an awful lot. There's been some stuff going on that I have to deal with in my life. Some personal stuff. Nothing dramatic. It's just living stuff to take care of. And I am going to have to go back to the States for about 3 weeks at the end of July, beginning of August. But then I'll come back I'm going to go back. I'm going to refit, resupply, buy a bunch of new maybe some new cameras, things like that. I'm testing out a potential studio here for interviews and things like that. When I come back in August, that's when then hopefully I'll have a lot more things set up so I can kind of be more effective in what it is I'm trying to do. So thank you for watching my vlogs. Thank you for being here today.
Absolutely.
Thank you for hosting me, Hal. And,
of course.
I always love talking to you. So
ditto. And so
all right, guys, I'm going to hop on and off.
At Philip Bittner right there.
I'll be around.
Yeah. Thanks, Philip.
All right, guys.
See you soon. Okay.
All right, we'll see you on Saturday, Hal. All right, guys.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So, hi, everybody. So I think we're alone now. There doesn't seem to be anyone around. Is it? Yeah, there we go. Let me put this up. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I know when we start getting into these long conversations, I forget to do resets. And you lovely people who Venmo'd during the show today reminded me to do it. So thank you so much. And clean drawers are essential. They totally are. Thank you, Benny Loco. This Loco loves you, America. There you go. There she is. Hold on. Let me move this over here. I got to move it. Yeah, there you go. Thank you, Sishui. Appreciate it. And yeah, good folks, good people. The Lady AG in Georgia better have some good security. She's going to need it after Trump's people. Yeah, she's going after Trump's people. Yeah, we'll deal with some of that stuff. Obviously in the afternoon show, because a lot of these folks are going to talk about it. I did want, before I go, there are a couple of news stories I wanted to share with everybody because we didn't do trends this morning. And I just wanted to be able to, let me see if I can bring this up because there's some pretty fascinating things. Let me see if I can bring this up. There we go. This is, Biden spoke to Brittany Griner's wife about her situation, and they're going to officially respond, to getting her out. She wrote a letter. They responded directly. I'm worried for her just because Russia sucks, but I feel like the chances of her being safe are in some ways greater than some others. As bad and as racist and as anti-gay as Russia is, there's still, she's going to end up getting exchanged for somebody awful. It's going to cost the United States to get her back, but it will totally be worth it. And then the lesson going forward is everybody out. Just everybody stay out. Now, the Russian thing I was talking about during the beginning of this was this right here. Russia blocks Kazakhstan's main outlet for oil exports on the basis that they violate environmental standards. Wait, yeah, it's up. Okay, good. Which I think is fucking hilarious and won't last long, by the way. And this is, by the way, the ones that go to Europe. So not the ones that go to China, for the record, because they can't. Even a single month of lost export earnings likely to constitute a serious blow for the Kazakh economy. One economist has estimated potential losses to exporters in the state at around 500 million for 1 month of it. Prime Minister Alikan Smailov on July 6 held an impromptu cabinet meeting to consider measures to minimize the negative consequences caused by export restrictions caused by the Russian court ruling. None of the instructions issued by Smailov have been made public. This is the third time this year that Kazakhstan is losing a partial or complete access to the CPC pipeline. More than 2/3 of the country's oil exports are moved through this route. There you go. And that's that little bridge area that goes to the Black Sea right here. Now, I would argue that the more they do this, the more they dick around with this nonsense, the more, the higher the chances that the Caspian Sea ends up being their transport point of, transport point going forward. Natural gas obviously requires pipelines unless you're going to go through the whole process. But since this is oil largely, and it goes to into the Black Sea for transport, the Caspian Sea is just as functional. But we'll see how it plays out. But this is pretty fascinating, and you have to remember the whole Kazakhstan had this uprising, and Russia sent in its troops to put down the uprising to help the Kazakh government and all that shit. Okay, I call BS on it, and I also think that this is more in line with what it was about going forward. That they needed to get Kazakhstan in line, in theory, before all this stuff happened, knowing that this was a hatch they were going to have to batten down. Now, the other thing is, this is just one of those Trump talking points that you just watch it, it continues to die. It's so lame. This idea that we needed to stay in Afghanistan to fight China and Russia and yada, yada. Meanwhile, the fact that we got out and the hubris of the Chinese government and the idea that the Belt and Road Initiative is going to build through Afghanistan is fucking bonkers and stupid. And yet they're still going through with it. And so both the ATIM, the East Turkmenistan independence movement, that believes themselves to be fighting on behalf of the Uyghurs, more so than the Kazakh Uyghurs that are on the Kazakhstan side of the border with China, is threatening to kill any of the Chinese workers or anybody who works with China in the region. This is, you have to understand, there's regions in the world where they hate Americans on a geopolitical reasoning. But once they recognize that an American can be anyone of any race or indeed any religion, it's harder for them to hate us in a strategic way in Central and North Africa and in these other places, just kind of generically when it comes to NGOs, for example, that are there as aid workers. They don't kill you just because of the patch, because you might look just like them, or you might look like a group they want to make money from or make business deals with. There's a lot of variance. That is not the case with Chinese NGO workers who are working in these areas. They are very distinct from the local populace. They behave distinctly differently. They are treated by their organizations as distinctly different from the local populace in a way that is offensive in a lot of ways to the local populace. And it gets gnarly. A lot of the stuff that happens to Chinese NGO workers and government workers in these places is swept under the rug because the Chinese government still wants their stuff, but they get taken hostage and killed all the time. And in Afghanistan, it's just gonna get worse. Because what these folks are realizing is that IS does not, it's about them versus anybody else. They have an us versus them that is is off. It exists in a way that I don't think most Americans can even fathom. I love this. In the wretched country, man, is this written and like it's a very specific language. I'll just say, investors will be wary of crossing Islamic State. Photo ADB. This is in Uzbekistan. It's a train track. This might as well be fucking Kansas. It's so weird. But this is what I was reading a little bit earlier with Philip in there. But it's a huge story. Now, this next story I want to show you, I just think is hilarious on so many fronts, if I may. I just, this one warms my cockles. This is causing a current freak out in right-wing world that I don't know, again, if you can fathom how mad people are getting about this. Because here's the thing. You know, a lot of people on the left have issues with Joe Rogan, and rightly so in a lot of places or whatever. And he's, I would call him a right-leaning centrist in all practical reasons. And he's a bit of a flibber to gibbet politically. And he talks out of his ass a lot, like any, kind of rando bro-ish pothead can at times. I've been on his show. The man is not evil incarnate. He's just, he doesn't care enough about these things to draw hard lines about them. And that's what makes him an issue for a lot of people. But because he's like that, you kind of have to know that this is how it's going to work out for the other side as well. Think of all the stuff where people are just rending their garments about Joe Rogan and him having Milo Yiannopoulos on, or Jordan Peterson at the end of the world, and how can you dare talk to these people, and blah, blah, blah. And then think about how people get upset about that. Mainly about stuff that was said or stuff that was hyped, whether it be ivermectin and other shit, like some serious things that people have concern about. And how upset you are about maybe him pushing ivermectin and how materially dangerous that could be, and your feelings about that, which I believe are legitimate. And then imagine how the Breitbart world and the Steve Bannon world are going to take this. You get me? Did you call him wishy-washy? Yes. I called him a bit of a flibber to gibbet, but sure. But meanwhile, there's this was an article that came out like just yesterday about Joe Rogan on Raw Story, about his footsie with with republicanism and right-wing stuff and pushing that shit, and how problematic it is, our favorite word, and all that shit. And meanwhile, the right is going to have the exact same wig out. Didn't Trump say something about this on Truth? I think it was, yeah. My sound's cutting out? Is that weird? All right. Huh. Might be part of the article. It might be part of the sound coming from this. I apologize if there's a sonic issue on my end. I don't think so, but okay. Anyways. So I just find this lovely and hilarious. Just because, just think about it for a second. Like, think about how angry this makes Trumpistan. Oh, sound is cutting out since Phil left? Okay, hold on one second. Let me try and solve that, if I may. Might be going back to the screen. Hold on, let's go back to here. Let me go back to this guy. Let me see this stuff. Sound levels. Why are you being weird? Sound levels. Okay, I'm going to... It should be fine. It looks like it's being normal. I'm going to turn my volume up a touch on here. Maybe it's the echo cancellation when I'm using it. Okay, I'm switching to my headphones for 1 second while I try to solve that issue. It's very weird. I don't know. Better check. There we go. Ta-da. Okay, sorry. It was being, I was trying to switch back and forth. Yeah. Sometimes when, sometimes when I switch sources, it auto mutes and it's very weird. But is it better? Okay. 5 out of 5 now, and you, okay, cool. Yay. Okay, now let's see if it works when I go back to showing you. Wonder why that, okay, so wait. So when I switch to this, hold on. Check. Okay. That's weird. Something is triggering when I change scenes, muting my microphone. Okay. Now I've got to keep an eye on it. Great. Another thing I have to keep my eye on. Christ almighty. All right. We're fine. I'm fine. How are you? All right. So, sound on switches. Okay. Yeah, it should be fine now. Yeah, it's just a weird thing. Still hear a hiss. The hiss might actually just be the vent in my basement in the room I'm in. It'll go off in a minute. Hopefully. So, I think this part is hilarious. Joe Rogan has been the center of a lot of controversy in recent months, but the podcast host says he has avoided the biggest controversy of all, interviewing former President Donald Trump. Now, granted, I don't think Trump has gone to, won't come to Texas and be in the studio. Even though when he's in Texas, I don't think he's making his way to Rogan's podcasting studio. I don't think he's going to sully himself. I think you have to go down there. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons. The host, who's faced a Neil Young-led boycott, content advisory warnings, past criticism of use the N-word, pulled episode, is interviewed by the Lex Fridman podcast, confirming he has declined an interview with Trump several times. Not a Trump supporter in any way, shape, or form. I've had the opportunity to have him on my show more than once. I've said no every time. I don't want to help him. I'm not interested in helping him. Rogan added that the ex-president is an existential threat to democracy itself, but at the same time denounced people who felt like they could abandon their own ethics and morals and principles just to attack him and anybody who supports him. Agreed. I mean, I think there's that difference there. When asked if he thinks Trump might win in 2024, he quipped that he would be running against a dead man. That was the joke, Joe Biden. I mean, Biden shakes hands with people that aren't even there when he gets off stage. That's a lie. I think he's seeing ghosts. You see him on Jimmy Kimmel the other day. He was just rambling. If it was anyone else, if he was Republican, if that was Donald Trump doing that, every fucking talk show would be screaming for him to be off the air. That's not true. Reagan did a lot of that shit. And look at all of, go look at Robin Williams' jokes about Reagan back in the day. And he served 8 years. Friedman suggests Trump might eventually be a guest on that despite Rogan's concerns, as evidenced by Rogan bringing on similar devices like Kanye West. Yeah, but Kanye's an artist. Kanye doing well or not doing well doesn't change the course of our country. It's a good point. In April, Rogan claimed on his podcast that his subscriber base has grown in recent months. Waves of controversy surround him, saying he gained 2 million subscribers. He's going to lose some now. Yeah. That's, get ready for that idea. And then there was a, let's see if I can find it on here, on Raw Story. Okay, because there was I want to say Bannon freaked out about that. Let's see, Putin, yeah. they had an article about Bannon on here, basically decrying Joe Rogan. Yeah, I totally believe. Yeah, there it is. This is it. Steve Bannon snaps over Trump snub by Joe Rogan. He doesn't need your low information voters. Now, that's interesting to me because of the article that Raw Story had put up that was an opinion piece, probably from Salon. No, it's Raw. Yeah, it's Raw Story. It's curious to me that Bannon may have seen this from the very same source. He may have looked at it on Raw Stories. That's hilarious. On his War Room pandemic, he tried to connect Rogan to the rapper who allegedly killed 7 people during the mass shooting. What the fuck? You know Joe Rogan is trash-talking Trump. Where's Joe Rogan taking the $100 million blood money from Spotify, where he's about Spotify putting the alleged shooter's rap videos up and making money off of it? Oh, so you're pro-cancel culture beforehand? Said no offense, Bannon grumbled. He doesn't need your platform. He doesn't need your low information voters. Okay, Trump deals with high information people. Your audience couldn't handle War Room, couldn't follow it. Well, that's true, but that's not about information. We have to watch this later. I'm going to do this afternoon. If that's got to be one of the videos because that's hilarious. High information voters. Please. But enjoy that freak out. I mean, that will eat up more sort of like Republican right-wing bandwidth in media today than almost anything else. Never mind that the asshole who opened fire in Highland Park, never mind that asshole has pictures of himself draped in a Trump flag, going to Trump marches, participating in them. His own father backing it, like they were aligned or still are, arguably, in their political beliefs. So that's the drama with the other side. That's exactly right, Deb. Anyways, I'm going to let you guys go. I will see you this afternoon for our regular show, 3 o'clock p.m. Pacific time. There's too much to cover. I mean, I could just be on 10 hours a day at this point. There's just too much hilarity and ridiculousness to cover. But I'm gonna stick to my schedule, and we're gonna get through this. And when Mike Lindell puts out his new Mike Pillow, conspiracy theory, he's got a brand new one in August. I will cover it. I thought he was going to do something this month. Remember, we were promised like 2 weeks ago that he had a new thing coming out. That didn't happen. So we'll see. Chip is running around. I think Camden has him and is petting him. So I'm not going to rip my cat from my child's arms to wag him on the air. So I'll let you guys go, and I will see you this afternoon. Take care of yourself and take care of somebody else. And remember, vote blue no matter who. And anybody who's like, I don't know if Dems really... STFU, folks. I'm not doing any of that. I'm not even slow walking a point through that minefield. It's stupid. Q snatch. That's right. All right. I will see you guys later. Take care, and I will see you soon. Hold on. Let me find the right ending page. Okay. There it is. All right. And credits. There we go. Thanks, guys. And thanks for the Venmo as well. Christina. And thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Mary. And thank you, William. Oh my gosh, you guys have been lovely. Appreciate it.